Saftu and Cosatu have put their differences aside and are calling for a national shutdown. They're protesting against the poor state of the economy and the high cost of living. But can our economy handle such shutdowns? Well, businesses are still trying to recover from COVID-19, the hard lockdowns that came with that, the July unrest, you will recall, and the constant threat of load shedding. Let's get some perspective now. Joining us is Redge Nkosi. He's an economist at Firstsource Money. Mr. Nkosi, thank you very much for your time. So let's begin with the key aspect here, and that is the impact that this is going to have on the economy. People like yourself are raising concerns that if the desired effect of this national shutdown is to get the economy boosted, well, this is going to be counterproductive. But the unions, they're arguing that this is the only way for both government and business to act with speed. Are they going to get the desired effect?
Very doubtful, very, very doubtful indeed. The economy obviously is going to get weak as a consequence of this strike. But whether the unions are going to get an immediate feedback from the government is the guess for all of us. In my view, it's not likely because the government is set in its ways. Therefore, the cost of living that they're protesting about, the poor economy that they're protesting about will continue. So, yeah, we must acknowledge that the strike is generally not a good thing for any economy. But at the same time, putting the blame on Cosatu and Saftu doesn't help us all at all. So we should, in fact, be locating this blame right at the center of our government. In this case, the presidency, the treasury, and the reserve bank.
So let's try and drill deeper. Cosatu is part of what is called the governing alliance. It's in bed with the governing ANC. Why is it that they ought to participate in a national shutdown of this nature if indeed this relationship is working for them? Does that point to a relationship that is not working? In fact, some hold the argument that it's not worked for a very long time. Is that perhaps why they are participating in this?
Absolutely. In fact, this relationship between Cosatu, the ANC, and South African Communist Party is a fanciful relationship, in my view. I think the ANC, especially the leadership of the ANC, I think we have to differentiate here. The leadership of the ANC has told itself that whatever inputs come from Cosatu and indeed the SSEP, they're going to be accepted for the sake of it, but they're not going to implement it at all. So the relationship there is a broken relationship, in my view. Hence, Cosatu stands up today and begins to strike. Had it been that the president or the ANC leadership had taken into account comments from Cosatu and the SSEP, frankly, the economy wouldn't be where it is now.
Let's talk about how else then are workers and, if you look broadly, members of society ought to raise their issues sharply. The unions that are, or the labor federations that are leading this national shutdown are saying this is the only way for both, as I say, government and business to sit up and listen. How else are workers to raise their voices, Mr. Nkosi, when things are not going the right way?
Quite frankly, I think we should all support Cosatu and the Saftu for coming up to agitate for better economic prospects, to lower the cost of living. There's no other way, in my view, because all sensible people have come to talk to government and said, look, the policies that you're implementing cannot work. They've never worked anywhere. Therefore, it's important that all of us, civil society as well, must come up. For example, nearly 80% of all the monies that are being transacted here go to the unproductive sectors of the economy. In other words, They're not GDP enhancing. All right? So what we're looking at in the regions of about 20, 30% of the transactions that go to growing the economy. That can't work in a poor society like this one. Secondly, 80% of the SMEs that want to go to a bank and pick up some loans there to boost their businesses or start their businesses, they're rejected by the banking system. And the Reserve Bank watches all this and worried, fixating its eyes on what it calls inflation targeting. Had it been that the Reserve Bank was active, was sensible, was a developmental Reserve Bank, we shouldn't be sitting where we are today. China has a Reserve Bank that's developmental. Bangladesh, the least developing country, took money in bullock carts to the ground. And we saw that inflation got down, the economy shot up, and people are celebrating. Here's the opposite.
And so your argument is for the role of the Reserve Bank to be developmental. If you were to put that in simple terms, that a person like me who's not necessarily financially educated, what does that translate to for a Reserve Bank to be developmental in its approach as opposed to inflation targeting?
Yeah, well, firstly, let's just quickly touch on inflation targeting. Inflation targeting essentially helps us financialize this economy. Financializing eventually means deindustrializing. So job losses and so on and so forth. A developmental central bank will be one that directs money in the economy towards GDP, enhancing transactions. It's a reserve bank that's going to ensure that the commercial banks, all right, ensures that SMEs get a bigger chunk of the loans. And they don't. As I said, 80% of them don't get loans from our commercial banks. Furthermore, the Reserve Bank could as well, if the government understood, send money to people like the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry, which is so central to industrial development in this economy. Not the money that DTI gets from the taxes that we get from the Treasury. No, the Reserve Bank should in fact be directing such monies to to SOEs as well. There we can see an economy turning quite sharply. This is what is happening in Asia. This is what's happening in poorer countries than South Africa. And they're indeed thriving. That's where we sit.
Okay. Let's conclude the conversation with SOEs that you mentioned. The unions, part of their demands today are that the government needs to put a stop to its intention to privatize state-owned companies like Eskom, for example, like Transnet, for example. Public-private partnerships clearly seem to not sit comfortably with them. How does that work, or how is that going to work, Mr. Nkosi, when we have seen the running down of these state-owned entities, and so the next people to look to for answers now is for the private sector to come in, because they seem to manage their affairs better than government?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's no such evidence. All right? What we should be looking for should be a central government that understands the SOEs, a central government that supports the SOEs, a central government that says, look, should an SOE begin to weaken up, it should quickly surround the SOEs with support in such a way that the SOE is directed towards developing the country. There's nowhere where a private-led initiative has ever developed a poor country into an advanced country. Nowhere. We don't have that in history.
But let me interject. You say as soon as an SOE starts experiencing problems, government should act by providing more support. I don't remember any other entity that has been financially backed like Eskom has been, because part of the messaging has been it is probably the one state-owned company that should not be allowed to fail, because the whole of the economy depends on it. What kind of support? How else do you support that entity by not involving those that, again, I argue, seem to do their work better in managing their finances, for example?
Well, firstly, there's an assumption here that all that EU's ESCOM is finance. It's not. All right? Finance, indeed, does contribute quite a great deal. But governance has been the problem, isn't it? You know, we've lost a lot of money through what we see now as, they call it state capture, or we call it state capture. But that has something to do with governance, isn't it? So government should have been at the center of protecting such institutions or helping such institutions move away from poor governance systems. But even financing as well. When you finance ESCOM, direct from government or the Reserve Bank, for example, there are conditions that you have to put in there. You just don't throw money out there. So the sense or the notion that we're going to get something out of the private sector coming into ESCOM is a fallacy, a complete fallacy. It hasn't worked anywhere. Now, if you remember, France is nationalizing its ESCOM there. Are you aware of that? So many countries in Europe and elsewhere that are remunicipalizing their water services, electricity services, and so on and so forth. What that tells you is that the system that we were told works doesn't work. But look, the system that we know works is the system that has been applied in Asia and continues to be applied in China right now today.
Yeah.
China had over 10,000 SOEs. The same thing in South Korea, and so on and so forth. The story about government intervention is not mixed. It's simple. And we have seen that.
Very, very cogent argument there. Economist Redge Nkosi, let me thank you very much for your time and